Today I'm going to be talking about some key points that we look for when we're closing a vector. We'll start the way any normal pack job would go from here, by preparing the container for the canopy. So I go ahead and open everything up, flip up your internal riser covers, just open up, make some space so you can lay your canopy into the container. Start by lifting the D-bag and place it just past the end of the main tray. At this point, I like to put my knee into the yoke to give it somewhat of the shape of the shoulder once the rig is packed and being put on. So what we like to do is splay them apart so they lay nice and flush against the reserve tray, and it limits interaction between the two on opening. With the risers placed, we can fold the internal riser cover to cover them and keep them flat. Closing the outer riser cover, take a minute to mate the magnets of the magnetic tuck tabs. Occasionally, we get reports of riser covers in the field being difficult to close or not closing properly. The first thing to check in that situation is the polarity of the magnets. When stacked on top of each other, do the magnets attract across the 3 different magnets that are within the riser cover? After ensuring that, our next step is to then assess the placement of the reserve risers. We're going to place the risers in line with the reserve riser, as we did before. Starting with that rear riser and toggle, I lay that one in line with the reserve riser, moving down towards the main tray. With the toggle placed against the reserve tray, I can keep mild tension on it while I move to the front riser. Front riser will follow that same line. As it gets to this point, we don't want to have the risers stacked on top of each other, which would create bulk out to the side. We want it to follow in line and then be placed against the reserve tray, slightly offset from the rear riser. Closing the internal riser cover will protect that as we close the external riser cover. To close the magnetic riser covers in a conscious manner, as opposed to just shoving them in and hoping for the best, we'll start by taking the external riser cover's tuck tab, folding it slightly so the corners get aimed at the pocket. As it enters the pocket, we keep them flat, and then squeeze the riser cover together to mate the magnets. As we're placing the main deployment bag into the container, there are a few considerations to keep in mind. We start by lifting up the center flap, or the main pin cover flap here, to give us some space to see what's going on in there. I'll lift and place the bag on top of that. I'll gently grab both line groups of one side of the risers, put mild tension on it to ensure that that riser snugged up against the reserve riser up on top of the yoke. Little bit of tension there, mirror that to the other side. By directing the lines to the bottom of the main tray, we're ensuring that they stay well clear of the main loop anchor point and the bottom corners of the reserve tray, ensuring that on deployment that there is no interaction or potential for snags on this main loop anchor. With our lines down to the bottom, we can then bring the bag into position. I like to rest the bottom edge of the bag on the bottom edge of the main container as it sits right here. Only momentarily. This will help us get the main deployment bag down into the tray. As we're placing the main deployment bag into the container, I start by resting it on the main container closing flap on the bottom here. I'll lift up on the main pin cover flap, which gives us some space to rotate the bag down into the container. Starting there, that gives us some of the bag into the container thus far. I'll come to the lower corners of the main container, and with a gentle shove, you can fill that lower corner. Lift, shove, lift and shove. This is a bit of a back and forth motion. It won't go all in one go. It's important to work side to side to keep things nice and even. To help rotate the main deployment bag into the container, we can lift up on the reserve tray using the closing loop there. We'll pull it back like that. As it rolls together, we ensure that that main deployment bag gets down deep into our main tray, and it's nice and even based on the sides of the reserve. We begin by threading that bottom main flap to start the closing process. At this point, we see a lot of people in the field pulling hard on this grommet, and it really stresses this plastic stiffener that's in the bottom main closing flap. Instead, I like to just get it under mild tension, place my knees on either side of the grommet and the plastic stiffener there, and then thread through the top main closing flap. Once through there, we have mechanical advantage through the pulley system that the grommets and closing loop have created. So then if we just lean back against it, we can quite easily pull plenty of loop through to be able to make the closing process easier. Once through, trap it with my knee, directing the bridle to the bottom of the main container. This is the alternate and approved routing method. We'll then thread through this right main closing flap. At this point, I will close the right main container's corner by placing my thumb on top of the Canopy fabric, closing that corner around, pulling across to ensure that it's closed and it's nice and even. Place my knee on top of the loop to trap it in place there, moving over to the left main closing flap. Thread through, in one motion closing that corner and simultaneously pulling that flap across. Once across, I can then get one more check ensuring that the green is in the window, showing that my pilot chute has been cocked. Pin the container, let the loop relax. I see that my binding tape from the left flap is stacked on top of the binding tape of the right. This is what we want to see with proper tension on the closing loop. If the grommets are stacked, that is not preferred and would show that either our loop is too short or the canopy that we're trying to put into the container is too small for the container. Now we go ahead and remove our closing tool. And then we begin to stow the bridle under this right main closing flap, directing it towards the bottom of container pocket, BOC pouch. We want to ensure that the bridle is not already under tension at the pin, so we leave a bit of slack between it and the pin itself. Not so much that it stacks up and folds back on itself, but definitely not already pre-tensioned. Once in place, we get one last check of our green in the window. We can close the main pin cover flap. We can then take the bridle and ensure that there are no twists in the bridle as we work towards the pilot chute. Within the pilot chute, there is a limiter tape. It runs from the bridle to the handle itself, and it limits how far the pilot chute can possibly be cocked. If we hold the bridle from this point, letting the pilot chute dangle straight down, we see that this limiter tape is under mild tension inside the pilot chute. We also see that the kill line sitting next to it has a slight bit of slack. That ensures that the pilot chute is as cocked as it possibly can be, and there is slight slack in the kill line, showing us just the same. We'll then take our pilot chute and find that center line. In this case, I have a free fly handle, which would have this tuck tab. I like to have the tuck tab facing me. That ensures that when I pack it, it will be in a position that it will allow me to stow it under the right main closing flap. I'll flip the pilot chute over, still finding that center line. Place my bridle nice and flat, bring the pilot chute over to the edge. We'll then fold the pilot chute in thirds on top of itself, so starting here, flip this way, then that way. We then are going to fold it in half. I pinch the lower edge of the pilot chute, capturing the bridle between my fingers as I fold up and in half. We'll then S-fold the bridle within the limits of the pilot chute that we have here, allowing the bridle to exit at the bottom of the pilot chute. With that nicely in place, we'll then fold in thirds once more, starting with the side nearest us, then the side furthest away. Folding in this orientation ensures that on extraction from the BOC, the relative wind will hit a folded section of the pilot chute, thus allowing bridle payout before pilot chute inflation. We can then stand the container up on edge, Creating some space in the BOC pocket before we put the pilot chute in will ensure that we don't overstretch our BOC, thus wearing it out prematurely. If properly folded, this pilot chute can be directed down into the pocket from here. There's not much of us actually entering the pocket and shoving down. We can just start up here, slide it in nicely. Filling the limits of our BOC completely keeps our pilot chute nice and flat and allows for gentle, easy extraction. At this point, we'll push the tuck tab down past the edge of the right main container flap, pressing down and slipping it up into place. Take a second to dress up the mouth of the BOC so as little ZP material or F111, depending on pilot chute style, is as exposed as possible. And with that, that's how to properly close a main container on a UPT Vector. Well, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more tips and tricks from the UPT Rigging Loft.